The Rings of Power. It's finally here, and it's worse than you imagine. Showrunners gave interviews more splendid than the stories they told, and counted the checked identity boxes dearer than the works of their favorite author. Uncreative writers sat on feckless social media sites musing over microaggressions, or in overpriced condos asking questions about representation. And so the empire of Hollywood sank into ruin. The line of studios failed, talent withered, and the works of J.R.R. Tolkien were given over to lesser men. The warning signs that Amazon's purchase of the film rights of The Lord of the Rings would turn ill couldn't have been clearer. The moment Amazon announced they would create a new story set in the Second Age, it didn't bode well. This wasn't an adaptation of a 1,000-page novel, but of barely 24 pages of text less descriptive than what you'd find in a history book. They had no clear-cut scenes, no dialogue, and few characters to work with. Smarter studios would have adapted The Lord of the Rings for TV, using the longer format to include sections of the novel cut out of the beloved film trilogy. But Amazon wasn't interested in that kind of show. They wanted to take the Disney Star Wars approach, recreating Middle-earth into Amazon's image, devoid of Tolkien's touch and bereft of any semblance of creativity. After all, it wasn't the world of Middle-earth they wanted, just Tolkien's name and the built-in audience that came with it. But that was their mistake. They underestimated the passion people have for Tolkien's works. As fans found out about Amazon's intimacy coordinators, the inexplicable multi-ethnic cast for a world based on medieval Europe, and the firing of well-known Tolkien scholars like Tom Shippey, fans began to question just what Amazon was up to, and their concern grew as Amazon said nothing about the show until a few months before its debut. Fans found out that this wasn't going to be an adaptation as much as a reimagining, one that ignored major elements of the lore, changed the timelines, histories, and people, and added in new characters who looked like discount tokenized versions of their beloved counterparts. Tolkien fans pointed out the cringe and got blasted as racist, sexist, purist gatekeepers. Except, it turns out, the fans were right. How bad is this show? Well, it opens with Galadriel getting bullied as a kid. She's a princess, the granddaughter of the High King of the Noldor, so it makes perfect sense that the other kids would pick on her for making a paper boat. Why are they picking on her? There's no context for why this would even be a thing. The kids are playing, and they see Galadriel sitting alone and say something about what she's doing. She makes the paper boat and puts it in the water. One of the kids says it'll never float. She says it'll soar, and as the boat gets wet, the paper expands, changing into a swan. And then, for no reason whatsoever, the kids throw rocks at it and sink the boat. Why? There is no reason at all for this to happen. Oh, wait, that's not true. There is a reason. So the showrunners could show that Galadriel is strong by having her beat up some little boy for wrecking her boat. Really? You're doing the action girl shit already? We're 2 minutes into the show. Really? Then Finrod shows up and gives some convoluted speech about stones and ships and light and darkness and whispers something into Galadriel's ear. Then we get the shot of the two trees just outside of Valmar, and for whatever reason, when you pause it, it looks awesome, but in motion it looks unfinished. I don't know why that is, but there are a bunch of VFX shots that look like this in the show. But that doesn't matter because we finally get to the core problem with the Rings of Power, the timeline and what they change. According to the show, Morgoth destroys the two trees. This is true, but they left out Ungoliant helping him. That's an important part to the story because her offspring leads to Shelob, who plays a major role in The Lord of the Rings. Now, you could claim I'm nitpicking if it ended there, but it doesn't. The show claims that the destruction of the trees led the elves to go to war with Morgoth, and they chase him across the ocean into Middle-earth, but that's not what happened. In the books, Morgoth and Ungoliant destroy the trees, and then Morgoth kills Finwë, the High King of the Noldor, steals the Silmarils created by Feanor, Finwë's son, and it's that act that causes Feanor and the Noldor to march against Morgoth. The show removes any mention of the Oath of Feanor, in which he and his sons pledged to suffer no one to have the Silmarils but them, or the kinslaying, making it seem like the Noldor just sail east with no problems. No, that's not what happens. What happens is that the Noldor massacre the Teleri when they refuse to give up their ships. This leads to the doom of the Noldor, where Feanor and the Noldor who follow him, which includes Galadriel, will fail in all that they do. The way the Noldor get into Middle-earth sets the stage for most of the key events in the First and Second Ages. Cutting this out is like cutting out the Messiah prophecy and John the Baptist from the Jesus story. Anyway, according to the show, the elves, just all of them, I guess, go to this strange land of Middle Earth that most of the oldest elves had actually come from, and a place where other elves still live, like Thingol, King of Dordia, also known as Elwë, Galadriel's great uncle. Do you think her grandfather would have never mentioned his brother? And keep in mind, even in youth, Galadriel was a lore master, so you'd think she'd know this, but no. Apparently, Middle Earth is just void of all elves. They show this random fight with dragons, eagles, and Finrod, and despite all the money thrown into the scene and all the practical effects, it just lacks any tension or emotion. What makes this scene worse is that the music is desperately trying to be epic, and it's not quite there, but still better than what's on screen, so it just feels disjointed. Like how they wrap up Morgoth's story. In the end, Morgoth was defeated. I mean, they're not going to show you that because it might actually be interesting to watch him be cast into the void. No, he's defeated off screen so they can get to Sauron. According to the show, after Morgoth's defeat, orcs spread across all of Middle-earth, with Sauron taking up Morgoth's place. Finrod tried to stop Sauron but gets killed, so Galadriel takes up Finrod's dagger to fight in his stead, searching for centuries for Sauron and for an answer to the mark he left on Finrod's body. Yeah, all of that is wrong. Sauron doesn't kill Finrod. A werewolf does. However, Sauron and Finrod do have the world's greatest rap battle. That's not a joke, that's in the book. They fight each other through song, echoing the battle between Manwë and Morgoth during the creation of Arda. But Sauron does not kill Finrod or leave a mark on him. After Morgoth is defeated at the end of the First Age, Sauron takes on a fair form to repent to the Valar, but chickens out and instead hides in Middle-earth. 500 years pass before he shows up again when he starts corrupting men in the east and south. The elves know nothing of him and aren't looking for him. None of these changes make any sense. The showrunners could have told the story that's in the appendices and it would have worked. It's not like they were changing things for time reasons. It's 8 minutes of backstory. If you were strapped for time, you could have cut out that bullshit bullying part. Instead, they make changes that fundamentally alter the history of Middle-earth, seemingly erasing dozens of important characters and making the elves look stupid because, using toddler logic, they just assume that if they can't find Sauron, an immortal Maya, he must be dead. Everybody thinks this except for Galadriel, 'cause vagina. I can tell what they were trying to do. The prologue from The Lord of the Rings is epic. It's one of the best openings of a film ever, and they wanted to have that here. The problem is that the showrunners and writers lack the skill and talent of Philippa Bowens, Fran Walsh, and Peter Jackson, and seemingly ignored Tolkien's writings, so they're not able to sculpt the same kind of pinpoint prologue. Instead, they just make up shit that contradicts what's in the appendices of The Return of the King, making a mess where there didn't need to be one. For a group of people who claim they want to write the novel Tolkien didn't write, we're 8 minutes in and you're already fucked up. How much worse can it get? Well, are you sitting down? Well, then sit down further. Now, it looks like I was wrong about the mountain climbing scene. This isn't Galadriel crossing the Helcaraxe, but instead her and her forces climbing the mountains of Angmar to go into Forodwaith. See, they're looking for Sauron's last fortress, except he didn't have any fortresses this far northeast. You're thinking of Angband, which was to the west. Morgoth had the northern fortress called Utumno, but that was north of the Iron Mountains, just west of Forokel, which looks like this now, meaning it's buried under the Ice Bay of Forokel. Did no one look at a map? No one. So these fools decide to climb up this ice sheet, and of course Galadriel is further ahead than everyone 'cause vagina. When she gets to the top, she checks a map showing this fortress that has a script I've never seen before. I thought it might be Tengwar, but no, the map appears to be gibberish. That just shows the care they put into the show. I could be wrong. If I am wrong, let me know what it says. But it looks like they just wrote random script on the map. This man-elf tries to convince Galadriel to turn back because it's been years since they've seen an orc, which doesn't make sense because in the prologue they said the orcs spread across all of Middle-earth after Morgoth's defeat. So wouldn't there still be some roaming around, if not in the north then in the south or the east? The guy says they should go back, but Galadriel says no because she ain't got no time for no cowardly man, because she's a strong woman. So strong that when one of her soldiers falls from the freezing cold, she wants to ditch the woman and has to be called out by name to stop. Galadriel, Lady of Light, has to be called out by name to care about somebody else. They just stumble onto this fortress, go in and find that Sauron or the orcs were doing weird experiments with dark forces. and apparently the altar or anvil Sauron used still burns with his power, again revealing some mark which I think is supposed to be his great eye. Galadriel wants to travel north to see what she can find, but the male elf thinks it's foolish since they don't know when this place was last used. But see, he's thinking with logic, whereas Galadriel is thinking with her gut, so you know she's going to make a stupid decision, but not as stupid as the showrunners. You remember how in the Jackson films the elves were all badasses? Yeah, that's gone now. A snow troll appears and attacks the party. How it survived with seemingly no life anywhere near the fortress, who knows? All that matters is that these elves, these warriors sent out by the High King to find Sauron and defeat him if need be, get their asses handed to them by a fucking troll. What were they gonna do if they rolled up on Sauron? Offer him lembas bread? They're supposed to be badasses and they're getting treated by a troll, but not Galadriel. She's a strong woman, so she jumps off this dude's sword and single-handedly takes down the troll 7 elves couldn't touch. This is not Galadriel. In fact, I'm going to stop calling her that. This is strong woman, and she's an insufferable, oblivious bitch. Because how else do you explain her not predicting everyone ditching her after she decides to go further north to look for something they can't even prove exists? They all abandon her, and she makes no attempt to change their minds. Instead, she's all, whatever, I do what I want, and goes off on her own. That's the opening of the show. You want people to care about a character who's so fixated on revenge she doesn't even care about her own troops, but who's also so strong and powerful she doesn't need them anyway. You took one of the most kind, powerful, and beloved characters in The Lord of the Rings and made her unrecognizable, unlikable, and selfish. All she cares about is her brother's dagger and getting revenge. So, for all of those people saying, you don't even know the show's gonna be bad, you're just saying that because you don't want brown people to women in your fantasy. Well, it turns out I was right. Eat a bag of dicks, bitch. Now, after all that effort to make this look serious, the showrunners turn it into a comedy. Some men, who are supposed to be hunters, wander around and one of them sees something scuttling about. Turns out it's the hobbits. Yeah, I know the show calls them Harfoots, but Harfoots are a type of hobbit, so it's a distinction without a difference. It's like saying these aren't Asians but Chinese people. Apparently, the hobbits hide from the big folk by making obvious buildings with fold-down doors like no one would notice this. More confusing is why the hobbits are multi-ethnic. They're supposed to be a nomadic tribe, and in the real world, very few nomadic tribes have people of different races or ethnic groups. Usually they're very keen on keeping out outsiders, so it makes no sense that you've got this mishmash of races. It makes even less sense that they all have different accents. Ain't nary a person, including parent and child, got the same accent. And for the second time, the showrunners try to copy the Jackson films, but fail. Like in Fellowship, after the prologue, we get the hobbits. And just like there, it's comical, but in the Rings of Power, it doesn't work. The acting is off. It feels like this was the first read-through that they filmed this while they were setting up the lights. It doesn't gel, and the music does not help. It's far too whimsical. All that's missing is a laughing track. One of them, Nori, takes her friends and some kids to a farm to steal food, because that's what happened in Fellowship. And while they're gorging on berries, Nori spots a warg track and tells everyone to leave, so they do. That's it. What was the point of these scenes? For Lenny Henry to check a book and see some prophecy about men coming from the south? Because that's the only thing that happens, and it doesn't affect the rest of the show at all. Just wasted time. Then we get the first and pretty much only bit of spoken Elvish in the show. I know it sounds weird given how focused the showrunners are on copying the films. We get this scene with Elrond where he's told that he can't attend some council because it's for elf lords only. Right, so Elrond, the guy descended from the 3 houses of the Edain, and the High Kings of the Noldor and Teleri, isn't counted as a lord. This is after his brother Elros has chosen a mortal life and lived as the king of Numenor. Yeah, Elrond's just a nobody. Just some random elfling. They tell him his friend is here to see him, that friend being Strong Woman. How in the hell do they not know who Galadriel is? They just announce her like she's a no one. All of them would know who she is and her importance to all of Elvendom. Literally none of this makes any sense. Kind of like these sweeping shots of the elven cities. They look gorgeous, don't get me wrong, but there's a glaring issue, and it's the thing that you see on the top left. Now, I don't care that they're telling you what the city is. I care why they have to tell you, and it's because you never see any of the cities. You get these sweeping shots, but nothing up close. It just jumps from that to an interior shot. And you've got this swelling music that's meant to inspire awe, but doesn't because you never get to see anything. Imagine seeing Gandalf ride with Pippin to Minas Tirith, and you get the Gondor music, and then it just cuts to Denethor. That scene works because you get to see the levels of the city. That's what makes it powerful. And maybe the Rings of Power doesn't show it because they didn't bother to make the cities distinct. If you look at Lindon, Volmar, and Eregion, they're identical. There's no major difference between them at all, nothing to show that they were built by different clans of elves or at different times. That's in stark contrast to what Jackson did, where all the elves have a similar general look, but changed based on location, clan, and age. But with the Rings of Power, nope. You spend hundreds of millions of dollars on 8 episodes, but you can't be bothered to make the elves look different. So Strong Woman meets with Elrond, and they seem to be smitten with each other, so I guess we're doing that now. And then we get some of the clunkiest dialogue I've ever heard. You can tell the writers are trying to make this sound like it's high fantasy, but are failing at it, and the acting is not helping. It really does seem like this is the first time they read through the script. Nothing comes off as natural. It's not even that they're phoning it in. It's like the actors aren't in character, they're just saying the lines. And it's the same lines for nigh on 12 minutes. Elrond telling Strong Woman that she needs to quit fighting. There's a small intermission where where Lily White Nori gets chewed out by her clearly black biological mother for going on the farm, and then it cuts back to Elrond belaboring the point for 10 more minutes. Just on and on and on. Okay, bitch needs to go home. We got it. Maybe if you spent less time saying the same thing 27 different ways, you could have made your $250 million show not look like it was filmed on cheap sets. I've said this before, there's something about shooting on digital cameras that just makes it so obvious this stuff isn't real. That said, I'm sure House of the Dragon uses digital cameras, probably the same model, but their stuff doesn't look like a set most of the time, and I think that comes down to the cinematography, the staging, the lighting, the lenses, and the color grading. All of those can lead to a serious cinematic tone that makes fantasy films feel real. That's completely missing from the Rings of Power. At any rate, Gil-galad awards all the warriors for their work, giving a speech that basically says the war is over, which pisses off Strong Woman. Elrond tells her that Gil-galad will let the warriors go back to the Undying Lands and tries to convince her to go back, but she doesn't want to go because of all the pain in her heart from the war. You know, that tragic war we never saw, so don't care about. You can see them trying to have the gravitas of Lord of the Rings, but not realizing that you have to earn it. You have to show it. Show us how she suffers instead of having Strong Woman tell us she's suffering. This is basic storytelling. Show, don't tell. Why does anyone have to explain this? Oh, that's right. The showrunners have like 5 writing credits to their names. They have no idea what they're doing. So after Strong Woman tells us how bad she feels, Elrond convinces her to go back to Aman because that's the only place she can be healed. Now, in saying this, Elrond tells her that going back to the Undying Lands is a gift from the High King Gil-galad, implying that no elf can go back without his permission. That's not how it works. Any elf in Middle-earth can go to Aman, except for the Noldor who sided with Feanor. They're banned. That includes Galadriel, which is one of the reasons she goes east after Thingol and Melian find out about the kinslaying. It's not entirely clear if Galadriel is forgiven prior to the end of the War of the Rings, but certainly after that point she's allowed to pass into the west. So this whole thing about her going back to Aman literally can't happen if Feanor acted as he did in the books, which implies that the Rings of Power is saying that there was no Oath of Feanor, no kinslaying, and no doom of the Noldor. The only way around this is if Galadriel wasn't a part of it, but that's still a massive change. Whole character arcs are completely erased if this is what the show is doing, ironically making it highly improbable there would even be an Elrond or Elros and therefore no Numenor, because their story is tied to the Oath of Feanor. You're actually erasing one of your principal characters and locations. It's nuts. But not as nuts as this black elf falling for some white woman. So let's just get to this, because even the show acknowledges their romance is retarded. So Arondir shows up to the Southlands to check on this town. He's part of the watch that monitors the men to see if they turn back to supporting Morgoth and or Sauron. They don't trust him, even though it doesn't seem like he's ever done anything wrong to them. They just don't like that the elves are in charge and want the return of their king. And one boy steps up to say this, and honestly none of this works because we don't have the backstory. Are the elves cruel to men? What have they done other than running away a king who might have been siding with the enemy? There's no context for the conflict. It's just there because the showrunners want it to be there, but it doesn't actually serve a purpose. And then there's this love affair between Arondir and Bronwyn that also makes no sense, because they go out of their way not to be seen together. Bronwyn also has a son who doesn't appear to know about the relationship, so when do they find time to spark up the love? This whole thing feels put on. They don't feel like a couple or like they're in love. It's just a thing that's in the script, like Padme liking Anakin. But we're supposed to buy this, just like we're supposed to buy that the elves are different races. Now, I know there's going to be some Wakandans getting pissy about this, so allow me to elf-splain. The elves arose in Cuivianen before there was a sun or a moon. The two trees had been created in Amon, but their light didn't reach past the Undying Lands, so the rest of Ardor existed under starlight. This is why the elves love the stars. Now this part is key. The thing about the elves is that they don't age, don't get sick, and aren't affected by weather the same way as men are. What that means is that they're unlikely to tan, because tanning is a skin's defense against the damaging rays of the sun, and the elves would either heal too quickly or be utterly unaffected. This is important because the way you get darker skin is typically by constant exposure to intense sunlight over many generations. The elves are described as having fair or olive skin. If the elves can't tan, they're not going to develop more melanin in their skin, meaning there would be no dark-skinned elves. Of course, for the bulk of their existence, there is no sun. They lived under starlight until the bravest of them accepted the call to go to Valinor. There's no reason to assume the light of the trees would have harmed the elves in any way, so those elves would have remained fair-skinned. Obviously, the elves who remained in Middle-earth wouldn't tan under starlight, and they wouldn't do so once the sun was created. In fact, by the time the One Ring is forged, there has only been a sun and moon for 2,100 years. There's also another point. The elves don't have many children. Usually they have a couple, literally one or two. Since they have so few offspring, they aren't likely to evolve quickly. There simply wouldn't be any way there would be dark-skinned elves unless they were like that from the beginning, and given what I just laid out, there's no way different branches of elves could all be fair or olive-skinned if their forebears were dark-skinned. This just couldn't happen. It makes even less sense considering that Arondir appears to be from the Undying Lands. He's asked by enough what he did back in Valinor, meaning that he would be one of the Noldor who came back to Middle-earth, and the Noldor are described as fair-skinned and dark-haired. So in the lore, it makes zero sense that Arondir is dark-skinned. And this is a fundamental flaw of the show. So much of what happens makes no sense in context to the lore. So much of it is made up that you really have to ask why the showrunners didn't just make their own story. If you weren't going to follow what Tolkien wrote, if you were so keen on having a multi-ethnic cast, why not create a new story that would allow you to shape the world as you wanted instead of trying to twist Tolkien's obviously European-influenced story into some third-rate Benetton ad? Anyway, in the village, it turns out that people and animals have been getting sick, and the villagers suspect it's poison. Arondir gets notice that Gil-galad has called back all the forces, so he can leave, but he doesn't want to do that because he's in fake puppy love with this white woman. While he's macking on old girl at her home, some dude with a sick cow shows up because Bronwyn is also a healer. It turns out the cow has been poisoned. She'd been grazing further east near Bronwyn's hometown, so Bronwyn and Arondir go to check it out. Meanwhile, Bronwyn's son finds some broken blade that appears to be connected to Sauron. He and this other boy break into this dude's barn and find the sword hidden under some boards. The boys almost get caught, causing one of them to cut himself on the blade, but nothing comes of it. Bronwyn's kid takes the broken sword because reasons. Why is he even in the barn? What's the relevance of the blade? Who knows? We already know that some of the people had ancestors who fought for Morgoth, so that's probably why the blade is in the barn. But since we don't have any context for why the boy would even look for it, this scene is pointless. Meanwhile, Strong Woman goes on the ship back to Amon, while Gil-galad and Elrond chat, with Gil-galad admitting Strong Woman is right, because of course she is, she's got the vagina. But he's sending her away anyway, because her searching for the enemy might rouse him. Because what you want to do when a likely not full-powered Dark Lord is about, is bide your time lest you rouse him and defeat him before he reaches his full might. What are you, Goku? Kill this dude now. Why are you waiting? The showrunners are just making the elves look stupid so that they can make Strong Woman look smarter than everyone else. Ironically, in the lore, it's Gil-galad who warns everyone about Sauron. Now, the elves are supposed to be immortal and ageless. At the oldest, they'd look like they were in their 30s. The actor playing Elrond is 29. I'm 40. He looks older than me. Y'all spent $250 million on this show, but y'all couldn't touch up the mouth lines? He looks older than Hugo Weaving when he filmed The Lord of the Rings, and the man was almost 40. By the way, the actor playing Gil-galad is the same age as me, and he looks older than me. Y'all couldn't touch any of this up. But fine, I'll give you that. We let Hugo Weaving and his receding hairline slide. We can let these guys slide. But explain this old motherfucker. Charles Edwards is a fine actor. I'm sure he's going to try his best with whatever the fuck is in the script, but come on. Dude is 52 and looks it. He has gray hair. Come on. You couldn't have found any young looking actors for this role. Really? Really? Anyway, Gil-galad sends Elrond to work with Celebrimbor in the Region. Meanwhile, Strong Woman's ship reaches the shadowy seas, the waters just outside of Amon. These veiled women remove all the warriors' armor, and when one tries to take Finrod's dagger from Strong Woman, she won't let it go at first. Eventually she does, and light cuts through the veil of clouds. However, Strong Woman hears Finrod's words from the beginning of the show. He says to her that sometimes the only way to tell the difference between the light above and the one below is to be in the darkness or something to that effect, because I don't actually care. This makes Strong Woman decide not to go back to Amon, but to return to Middle-earth. As this happens, all the characters we've seen in the show see this meteor flying across the sky. As it lands, Strong Woman jumps into the ocean and watches as the clouds swallow the light. Now she's got one hell of a swim back to Middle-earth. Good luck. Hope you can even remember which direction it was. Back in Linden, a leaf falls from a tree, and when Gil-galad picks it up, the veins turn black. 'Cause reasons. I can't even come up with an idea for why this would happen. Back in the Southlands, Nori comes across a man in the burning meteor crater, and that's how the show ends. I knew this was going to be a mediocre mess, but there's a difference between knowing and experiencing, 'cause this was fucking excruciating. The first 20 minutes of the show is so slow I could feel the seconds tick away. The production value of the show is all over the place. There's not a single scene in the show that's consistent. At some point, something looks fake or like a set or unfinished or just off. The performances are middling. The best way I can put it is that you can tell they're acting. The overall feel is like someone saw that Shannara show and just threw more money at it. If you told me this was another season of that show, I'd believe you. The show is loaded with music, often in moments that don't need it. I get that y'all spent $250 million and you want your money's worth, but have you ever heard of the concept of let it breathe? You don't have to fill every minute with music, and nothing that happens on screen is nearly as epic as the music tries to sound. And that's nothing against the composer, I'm sure he's fantastic. But it's so clear that the showrunners are trying to do a knockoff version of The Lord of the Rings that is more embarrassing than painful. This is definitely the GoBots to House of the Dragons Transformers. Hell, I think that's giving them too much credit. This is the Bayformers to the Transformers. You can see what they were trying to do and how badly they failed at it. And it gets worse. I need a fucking breather before I review the second episode. How bad is the second episode? Everyone who dissed the Hobbit films now owes Peter Jackson an apology. You will be begging for goofy beards and silly fight scenes after you see this shit. It's that bad. I actually stopped eating because I couldn't believe what the fuck I was watching. I didn't even swallow the food for 2 minutes. I was stunned into not chewing. And for all those who got pissy about folks criticizing the show before it came out, would you like some help lifting that metric fuck ton of salt you got on your shoulder? 'Cause y'all were wrong. We've seen this before. We know the signs. We know what we're talking about. We know when the show is going to be bad. We were right. This show is a mess. It's bad fan fiction, the kind that would get you booted off of fan fiction sites if you posted it. And keep in mind, the showrunners did not have to get to the Lord of the Rings film level. They had to get to the pilot episode of Game of Thrones, and they failed. And I'm sure lots of people are going to praise the show. That's fine. Everybody doesn't have good taste like me. You can like the show if you want. I'm still going to call it what it is. It's a fucking mess. On the plus side, at least Christopher Tolkien didn't live to see this, because I think even he'd be praising Peter Jackson after seeing this shit. But what do I know? I'm just some guy.